Hi, everybody. Oh, excuse me. This. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Patriots History. I'm Larry Swikart, co-author of Patriots History of the United States, and with Michael Allen. And obviously, I am the person who conducts these lessons, these readings from Patriots History. If you're new to all this, if you want a copy of the new chapter, chapter 23, to go with the 15th anniversary edition of Patriots History. This chapter goes from 2018 to 2023. It's in PDF form. I'm happy to send you a free copy. Just email me at larry@wildworldofhistory.com. You'll also get inserts, about 20 pages of inserts to make on your own if you want to throughout the book as you go through it, based on new research I found since 2018. Now, all readings are done from the 15th anniversary edition. If you have earlier editions, the page numbers won't line up, and sometimes the headers won't line up. Today, that's irrelevant because we're going to be reading from the Patriots History Reader. Remember, every time we come to a place where a reading is prompted, I stop and actually do the reading. And this particular reading is called What the Social Classes Owe to Each Other by William Graham Sumner from 1883. But before we get to that, a couple of reminders. If you need a curriculum, this is a full curriculum at Wild World of History, not what I'm doing here. I have a full curriculum, teacher's guide, student guides, tests, and me teaching every chapter of Patriots History in video. So you might want to check that out. We also have a world history class from 1775 to the present. Again, I teach every lesson in video. Napoleon, Marx, Hitler, Reagan, the whole sweep of modern history. So check those out. The prices are superb, but they are going up here at convention season. We got to raise them again this year. So check out the deals now while you can. And remember, we're turning Patriots history into a movie followed by a series like The Chosen. And we will follow one family through the whole arc of American history. Help us out. Buy Larry a coffee. Just give me one coffee, $5. Buy me one coffee. We're over halfway to our goal, and we think we can make it here this year and get it fully funded to do a torch video to take to Angel Studios. And there's a chance if Angel and their cohort like it, they may kick in and finish off the funding for us, or certainly help us do a crowd fund that would allow us to raise the full movie's budget. So help us out. All right. We are looking at What the Social Classes Owe to Each Other by William Graham Sumner, 1883. This will be part one. It's a little bit long, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing in this episode. We'll get the rest next time. William Graham Sumner was an influential academic who published in a variety of disciplines and is often considered the father of social Darwinism in America. He was the first to teach a course in sociology and a staunch advocate of laissez-faire free market capitalism. His book, What the Social Classes Owe to Each Other, published in 1883, clearly outlined what social classes did not owe each other and formed the basis for the traditionalist opposition to communism and socialism, which were gaining hold in the United States with a new wave of immigrants from Europe. Within the next 2 decades, populism would give way to socialism, and Sumner would take a leading role in opposing the new ideology. He offered a view of social harmony that entailed a certain amount of common sense. Those who have in abundance should voluntarily help those who have nothing, both for reasons of civic peace and to ensure that government does not force redistribution. Voluntarism and charity had been ingrained in American culture since early colonial times as settlers worked together to protect themselves from Indian attacks and the hardships of taming the land. And Sumner's work was a logical extension of that experience. By Sumner's time, however, the demographics were changing. With rapid industrialization taking place in the United States during this time, social Darwinism was used by giant corporations to justify policies of low wages, long working hours, and company towns, particularly companies involved in textiles, steel, coal, copper, iron ore mining, and railroads. These same industries were the first to become unionized and the first to experience strikes and labor unrest, all of it quite bloody. Sumner felt that since employment was voluntary, workers could always vote with their feet to go elsewhere, thereby automatically forcing companies into more labor-friendly practices. This, of course, didn't work if there was collusion among the companies that were doing the hiring, or if you were really the only company in town, and it would be almost impossible to relocate. But Sumner felt that since employment was voluntary, workers could vote with their feet and go elsewhere, thereby automatically forcing companies into more friendly labor practices. American Indians, with their history of being mobile, would indeed leave when mistreated, but recent immigrants tended to herd together and, with many unable to speak English or understand the American political or legal systems, to view both job and employer essentially as permanent. In many European countries, a person's job was almost part of their name. Miller, okay, and certainly governed their economic and social status. In the United States, a person could have many jobs or careers, and if he disliked one, he was free to choose another. Even today, in Europe, that is often not an option, and social and geographic mobility are still limited. Sumner's thesis tended to describe people born in America as better than recent immigrants, probably exacerbated the conflict between the social classes and confirmed immigrants' assumption that the United States is a little different from their mother countries. The reader should consider whether another approach would have been more appropriate to avoid European-style militant unions, socialism, and job ownership. Obviously, Sumner did a poor job of selling American exceptionalism to newcomers, and progressivism, jolted into being by European-style anarchists, was the result. From what the social classes owe to each other. It is commonly asserted that there are in the United States no classes, and any allusion to classes is resented. On the other hand, we constantly read and hear discussions of social topics in which the existence of social classes is assumed as a simple fact. The poor, the weak, the laborers are expressions which are used as if they had exact and well understood definition. Discussions are made to bear upon the assumed rights, wrongs, and misfortunes of certain social classes, and all public speaking and writing consists in large measure of the discussion of general plans for meeting the wishes of classes of people who've not been able to satisfy their own desires. These classes are sometimes discontented and sometimes not. Sometimes they do not know that anything is amiss with them until the, quote, friends of humanity come to them with offers of aid. Sometimes they are discontented and envious. They do not take their achievement as a fair measure of their rights. They do not blame themselves or their parents for their lot as compared with that of other people. Sometimes they claim that they have a right to everything of which they feel they have a need for their happiness on earth. To make such a claim against God or nature would, of course, be only to say that we claim a right to live on earth if we can. But we are absolutely shut up to the need and duty, if we would learn how to live happily, of investigating the laws of nature and deducing the rules right of living in the world as it is. These are wearisome and commonplace tasks. They consist in labor and self-denial repeated over and over again in learning and doing. When the people whose claims we are considering are told to apply themselves to these tasks, they become irritated and feel almost insulted, he says. They formulate their claims as rights against society, that is, against some other men. In their view, they have a right not only to pursue happiness, but to get it. And if they fail to get it, they think they have a claim to the aid of the other man, that is, to the labor and self-denial of other men, to get it for them. They find orators and poets who will tell them that they have grievances, so long as they have unsatisfied desires. Now, let me take a break here and note the concept of classes. I rebuke that in the name of Jesus. I reject that. There are no such things as classes. In Marxist terminology, a class was a fixed group of people who could never change. And it was entirely demarcated by whether or not you worked with your hands. Those who worked with their hands were the proletariat. Those who worked in any other means, talent, management, capital, musical talent, football talent, didn't matter what it was, those were bourgeois. And the two were pitted against each other. Now we know for a fact that many, many, many people, probably the vast majority of Americans, started with some sort of lower tier work, often with your hands. As a kid, I didn't do it very long, but I pulled cotton or hay bales up as my father would drive a tractor. They have different machines now that do all this for you. But back then, you drive a tractor and you would pull a flatbed trailer behind you. And the tractor would angle right close to a hay bale. And as it passed the hay bale, an employee, not a worker, an employee, me, would take a long metal hook the baling wire of the hay and drag it up onto that flatbed platform. And the tractor just kept going. And by the time you got it up to its place, you had to go back and drag the next one up. And usually you could get 1 or 2 rows before the tractor would turn around at the end, sometimes pause, and let you stack the bales so that you could go on for the next one. By the end of the day, you had a whole trailer full of hay bales. And I'm telling you, that was seriously hard work, especially in the Arizona sun. I also did a very little bit of cotton tromping, where cotton would be dumped into these big metal trailers and wire trailers, and you have to climb down in it and tromp it down like Lucy tromping down the grapes. But cotton's harder to tromp than grapes. Your feet sink into it. I mean, it's really, really hard work. And again, especially in the Arizona sun, it's really hard. But most people started at some sort of lower tier job, what we would call a proletariat job, whether it's working at McDonald's, Uber driver, whatever it is. Almost all of those people, unless they really like what they're doing, and there are people who like that, gravitate and graduate to a much higher level job that does not involve using your hands or your body. And there are many jobs today that we need people who still use their hands and their bodies. Craftsmanship jobs, plumbers, electricians. These are jobs you simply cannot do with a computer or remotely. They must be done by somebody on their hands and knees in person in dark areas where it's hard to get to, right? Or climbing up into attics or whatnot. We just had some floors put in, wooden floors, carpeting. Man, did those guys work hard. They were fast and they were efficient, but boy, did they work hard. So usually the career path is you start at such a job, and once you realize how hard it is, if at all possible, you get out of it by improving your skill set to where you become a manager of other people doing those jobs, or you get education so that you are in higher requirement jobs, jobs where you have to be using your brain instead of your brawn. But almost 15%, I've seen a study that said almost 15% of American CEOs started at McDonald's. It's not surprising. My very first real job, once I got off the farm, was at Der Wiener Schnitzel. I don't know if you have those where you are, but it's a hot dog place. They used to build them in a chalet style, and you had a drive-through through the middle of the chalet. And I was named night manager. I thought it was a promotion. It really wasn't. I was there till like 1 o'clock in the morning. And boy, if you got me angry, I'd drop that hot dog in the grease pit before I give it to you. You get a little extra grease on your dog. But that was my first job, and it was menial. And I soon got out of that and got into other things. So there's no such thing as classes. This is a Marxist term that his whole stupid structure only worked if you could play on his field. If he could get you to play on his field with all this dumb terminology, then it made sense. But otherwise, you apply just a little bit of logic, and his whole scaffolding falls apart. So I just want to let you know there, this, watch the word classes, okay? It's a very Marxist term. Graham didn't even know he was doing that. All right, or Sumner. Now, if there are groups of people who have a claim to others' people's labor and self-denial, and if there are other people whose labor and self-denial are liable to be claimed by the first groups, then there are certainly classes. Now, see, he's defining it as who has a claim. Again, that's lame. For a man who can command another's labor and self-denial for the support of his own existence is a privileged person of the highest species conceivable on earth. Can you say what we're seeing today in U.S. aid? These employees, these government employees, think they have a claim to all Americans' tax dollars, and they move a little bit of pile of money from this place to that place, and they think they're working real hard. Ridiculous. So let's go over this again. If the groups of people who have a claim on other people's labor and self-denial, and if there are other people whose labor and self-denial are liable to be claimed by the first groups, then there certainly are classes and classes of the oldest and most vicious type. For a man who can command another man's labor and self-denial for the support of his own existence is a privileged person, the highest species conceivable on earth. Yes, they are. How do you think those people in D.C. all live in these gigantic homes and mansions in Fairfax, Virginia, and Maryland? Princes and paupers meet on this plane, and no other men are on it at all. On the other hand, a man whose labor and self-denial may be diverted from his maintenance to that of some other man is not a free man, correct, and approaches more or less toward the position of a slave, correct. Therefore, we shall find that in all the notions which we are to discuss, this elementary contradiction that there are classes and that there are not classes will produce repeated confusion and absurdity. Again, that's because he's not getting to what Marx's definition of class was, which was somebody who works with their hands. And then the proletariat is those who employ or control other people with wages. We shall find that in our efforts to eliminate the old vices of the class government, we are impeded and defeated by new products of the worst class theory. We shall find that all the schemes for producing equality and obliterating the organization of society produce a new differentiation based on the worst possible distinctions, the right to claim and the duty to give one man's effort for another man's satisfaction. It's a good way of putting it. We shall find that every effort to realize equality necessitates a sacrifice of liberty. Good. Certain ills belong to the hardships of human life. They are natural. They are part of the struggle of nature and existence. We cannot blame our fellow men for our share of these. My neighbor and I are both struggling to free ourselves from these ills. The fact that my neighbor has succeeded in this struggle better than I constitutes no grievance for me. Certainly other ills are due to the malice of men and to the imperfections or errors of civil institutions. The discussion here made between the ills which belong to the struggle for existence and those which are due to the faults of human instrumentations is of prime importance. He's saying basically that there are differences between people. I have a spot in my glasses. There's differences between people, and some are able to overcome the ills we all experience, that is, shortages of money to achieve everything we want. And let me just say this. No matter where you are, with very, very few exceptions, no matter where you are, you always think you aren't doing that well. There's people, look at Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders has 3 houses. He's a U.S. senator, and he still rails against the rich. Seriously? I mean, there's people out there. Okay, let me give you a great article to go look up. It's by Ben Stein. Ben Stein. And Ben Stein at the time was a writer, served in the Nixon White House. I think he did some of Nixon's speeches. And he once wrote an article in the American Spectator. I strongly encourage you to see if you can find this, called Living on $500,000 a Year. Now, as I am speaking this, it is February 2025. And today, especially if you live in California, Fairfax County, parts of New York, $500,000 is not that much money. Certainly you couldn't afford a house in Manhattan on $500,000 a year. You need millions and millions to do that. That's why even the rich people live in penthouses there, right? In California, I think median home price is 1.5 mil. All right, so living on 500,000 wouldn't even get you a hovel in parts of California. So it all depends on time and place. But when Ben Stein was writing, $500,000 in the late 1970s was a lot of money. I think that would be equivalent to $2.5 to $3 million a year now, which is quite a bit of money. It's not Elon Musk money. It's not Jeff Bezos money. It's not even Donald Trump money, but it's pretty good money. And you could live really, really high on the hog. Anyway, look up this article, because he and his wife were screenwriters and they sold a number of scripts just like that, 2 or 3 in a row. And they got all these advances. And he recalls that the his and hers Mercedes were picked out before the ink was dry on the checks. I mean, they immediately upgraded. They had 3 houses, one in Malibu, one in Aspen. I forget where the third, I think the third one was someplace else in California. And they had gardeners, landscapers, cable TV, the full array of everything you need to have a house up and running all the time, going all the time. And he said their floral bill, flowers, $11,000 a month back then. Okay. So he quickly realized that they were over their heads. And I'll never forget this line. He said, "You don't know the meaning of fear till you get a margin call from your stockbroker at 3 a.m. Margin calls when they say, hey, your stock value has plummeted. You need to put up more money. And now, where do you get the money if you don't have it? So anyway, I urge you, look that up, Living on $500,000 a Year by Ben Stein. See if you can find that. Okay. Point was, I don't care who you are. Most people inevitably do comparisons. And most people are going to think, I'm not that well off. My house isn't that big. Even my wife, Mrs. LS, does that. Well, you know, I could live in a nicer house. 5-bedroom house in Arizona with a pool. I never dreamed I'd be in a house like this. But, well, I could live in a better house. So it's inevitable. It's human nature. You kind of are always aspiring, looking up, looking up, looking up. And so you're always thinking, well, my neighbor has it better than I do. My neighbor's got 2 Mercedes. I only have 1. My neighbor has a Mercedes and a Ferrari. That guy has a Tesla or one of those armored cars. I forget what they call those ridiculous looking contraptions, self-driving. Anyway, you get my point here. Okay. It will also be important, in order to clear up our ideas about the notions which are in fashion, to note that the relation of the economic to the political significance of assumed duties of one class to another. You can't separate them. That is to say, we may discuss this question whether one class owes duties to another by reference to the economic effects which will be produced by the other classes in society, or we may discuss the political expediency of formulating and enforcing rights and duties respective between their parties. In the former case, we might assume that the givers of aid were willing to give it, and we might discuss benefit or mischief of that activity. In the other case, we must assume that some, at least of those who were forced to give and did so unwillingly, Here, then, there must be a question of rights. The question of whether voluntary charity is mischievous or not is one thing. The question about whether legislation which forces one man to aid another is right and wise, and as well as economically beneficial, is quite another. Great confusion and consequent errors produced by allowing these two questions to become entangled in the discussion. So he says, let's separate the two. Especially, we shall need to notice the attempts to apply legislative methods to reform the ills which belong in the order of nature. Under the names of the poor and the weak, the negligent, the shiftless, the inefficient, silly, impudent, are fastened upon the industrious and the prudent and the responsive, and as a responsibility of a duty. On the one side, the terms are extended to cover the idle, intemperate, and vicious, who by combination gain credit which they do not deserve and which they should not get if they stood alone. On the other hand, the terms are extended to include wage receivers of the humblest rank who are degraded by the combination. The reader who desires to guard himself against fallacy should always scrutinize the terms poor, weak as used, so as to see which or how many of these classes they are made to cover. In other words, he's trying to say, make sure you know who you're talking about. Are these people who are the people on the street corner, the homeless, the so-called bums? Well, we've all seen some in our life that we think are truly indigent and needy, and we want to help those. And we've all seen grifters and scammers. I'll never forget my friend, keyboard player in my first band. He was coming up on a freeway exit, and there's a guy standing there with a sign. This was in fashion back then, not so much anymore. Different things are in fashion. But the sign said, "We'll work for food." In other words, just give me a hot meal and I'll come work for you. So my friend said, tell you what, I'm resurfacing my driveway. You come home with me, you work on the driveway. It'll take us about 5 days, and I'll pay you for 5 days work at the end of pay for a day's work every end of every day, and I'll feed you 3 meals a day. Pretty good offer, right? If you're just wanting to, will work for food. Guy said, can't you just give me $1? So, and then you've seen probably, I don't know if you've seen the movie, Don't Be a Menace to South Central Los Angeles While You're Drinking Your Juice in the Hood. It's one of the first Wayans brothers movies, and it shows this homeless guy outside, and he's got his sign up there, and he looks really shabby, and he uncovers a nice watch. He looks at his watch and folds up his sign, takes off his kind of clothing, and he's dressed pretty well, and he goes and gets in the car that's parked right there, right? I saw one guy on the walkway at Las Vegas, and at least he was honest. He said, why lie? I like to drink, and darn if I didn't give him $1. But Sumner is saying you need to discern who is who before you get into all of these moral arguments, okay? When I've read of certain of these humanitarian discussions, I have thought it must be quite disreputable to be respectable, quite dishonest to own property, quite unjust to go one's own way and earn one's own living, and that the only really admirable person was the good for nothing. The man who by his own effort raises himself above poverty appears in these discussions to be of no account. It's absolutely right. You're given no credit for having done something on your own, and people like Elon Musk, who was not raised in great wealth, had a very troubled childhood, are looked down upon, frowned upon. There's a robber barons, that kind of stuff. So the man who's done nothing to raise himself above poverty finds that the social doctors flock about him, bringing the capital which they have collected from the other class. Note they don't collect it from themselves. This is his point. He always is going to talk about the forgotten man. And the forgotten man is the social do-gooders always go out and try to fleece the taxpayers, the forgotten man, to help somebody else. They don't go help somebody else themselves. Think Clinton Foundation. All right. All these people are worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. Millions. Mitch McConnell worth millions of dollars. Nancy Pelosi worth millions of dollars. If they want to do something to help people, do it. Spend your money, not mine. But they don't do that. I will remind you, we aren't there yet, but we're going to come up on a remarkable episode in American history where President Grover Cleveland is confronted with a seed corn bill that he thinks is unconstitutional. He says the Constitution does not give me the right to do that, does not give you the right to steal from this group in order to help that group, no matter how deserving that group is. And what Cleveland said to Congress is, I'm going to veto this bill, but you guys make more than enough money that's in this bill. I think the bill is for $10,000. He said, you make more than that. Why don't you take up a collection among yourselves and go help the farmers? Oh no. So since we're a little off topic, one more reference here, movie reference, Cinderella Man. Great movie. And there's a scene where Jim Braddock is really broke, and they've cut off the electricity and lights to his apartment, and his kids really are freezing, and the mother's recooking milk like 12 times over and adding a single spoonful of flour or something. It's horrible. Great Depression. And he goes up to the Boxing Commission Club, the athletic association, where all these really rich guys who make money off boxing or gamblers and own fighters and so on and so forth, they're all in there in their suits and so forth. And he goes in and he says, you guys know me. They've cut off. I just need to get my children back. We have to put them with relatives because we can't have them in our apartment. It's freezing in there. I owe $28 to get the lights turned back. He was asking for $28. I know a steak back then cost a nickel. That was a lot of money, relatively speaking. Any one of those guys could have put in a $100 bill. But some of them just look at him like he's dirt. And finally, he gets enough money scraped together, nickels, dimes, a few dollars to turn the lights back on. I mean, it's really, really a touching scene. So anyway, the man, let's start here. The man who's done nothing to raise himself above poverty finds social doctors flock about him, bringing the capital which they have collected from the other class and promising him aid of the state to give him what the other had to work for. In all these schemes and projects, the organized intervention of society through the state is either planned or hoped for, and the state is thus made to become the protector and guardian of certain classes. Worse than that, it's made to become the thief of the other people. It's made to, by force, take your tax money to go help other people who maybe don't deserve it, haven't earned it, are in no ways entitled to it. The agents who are to direct the state action are, of course, the reformers and the philanthropists. Their schemes, therefore, may always be reduced to this type, and here it is, that A and B decide what C shall do for D. In all these discussions, attention is concentrated on A and B, the noble social reformers, and on D, the poor man. I call C the forgotten man, because I've never seen that any notice is taken of him in any of these discussions. When we've disposed of A, B, and D, we can better appreciate the case of C, and I think that we shall find that he deserves our attention for the worth of his character and the magnitude of his unmerited burdens. Here it may suffice to observe that on the theories of the social philosophers to whom I referred, we should get a new maxim of judicious living. Poverty is the best policy. If you get wealth, you will have to support other people. If you do not get wealth, it will be the duty of other people to support you. Well, I think because of all my rambling, but also because this is a really long piece, I think this is a good place for us to stop today, and we will pick up here on page 209 next time we come back to what the social classes owe to each other. In the meantime, buy Larry a coffee. Yeah. That slothful, indolent guy. No, this is for another project that we can all take pride in. Folks, when this is done, you're going to want to take your kids to see it. The kids are going to want to go see it. It's going to be a truly epic story. So help us out, buy Larry a coffee, and I'll see you next time.